Good morning, everybody. It is right at the top of the hour at 9 o'clock, and we want to respect all of your time and make the best use of your time this morning. So we will go ahead and get started. I am Tony Best with Aduro, and I have with me my brilliant and wise friend Christine McHugh. And I am delighted to be back with you today. For all of you who are here, if you missed last week's live cast that Christine did with Amy around mental health and self-care and making sure you're taking care of yourselves as leaders, I highly recommend that you go back and check out the recording. It was brilliant, and just a lot of really key nuggets to just take away, and taking care of yourself and how you can set others up for success by being at your best. So just a reminder to all of those of you who are joining, this is just a live conversation with Christine and I. There are no slides, so if you don't see any, you're not missing them. And we're picking hot topics that we're hearing from our networks, from inside of my own company with our own team of leaders, and touching on those things and how we can really just give and serve to leaders everywhere during this time. There's no playbook on leading through a global pandemic in the year of 2020, so we're all learning this at the same time, and we invite you to both chat in things that are working for you when these ideas come up in the conversation with Christine and I. Will be monitoring that chat. And if you have questions that you would like us to address, please use the Q&A feature that you should see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we'll be able to see those questions and answer them live if we've got some coming in there. So please don't hesitate to use those two features. Christine, thank you for coming back and spending some time with me this morning. How are things in your world and with your network of leaders around you right now?
I think it's just every day is a new day, right? And as I connect with people, talk with my clients, talk with leaders I work with, people are definitely thinking about what does return to the workplace look like, if that's applicable, and all of the undertakings going on there. But I am starting to hear more percolation of, how are we measuring performance right now? What does productivity look like? Because I think originally when we started experiencing the early stage of this pandemic, especially in the Pacific Northwest area, there was a perspective that it might only be a couple of months. And now businesses and leaders and organizations it's going to be much longer than that. And so what might have been resumed to normal, and I know that there's even question, why are we even using the word normal anymore? Because there's no such thing as normal. But I think it's going to be at least through the end of this year, and well into next year, where work is going to look different, and therefore, productivity and expectations and performance questions are coming up around that now, realizing that there isn't a quote unquote finish line. So while this return to the workplace kind of planning is undertaking, I think there's also a realization is it's going to be a while before, things are more stabilized. Because again, I'm not using the word normal. So what are you hearing? What are you seeing in Aduro with your customers?
Absolutely. Well, I think, in the Pacific Northwest and even just on the West Coast, and we're seeing these trend setters, of course, in larger organizations that are saying either they're not returning to their physical workplace in 2020, or they're extending that option. And part of that is just the unknown of what is going to transpire over the next 6 months. But it's also for those larger organizations, the infrastructure that they need to put into place in order to have people return to work with all of the safety precautions and physical distancing that they'll still need to have in place for a while. It just makes more sense for them to push that out, even when states are loosening the considerations around being in the workplace or staying at home. So, all our clients are definitely starting to look at and put into place, like, what do we need to do to return to work? But in the meantime, as you said, even just in, looking at their internal teams and productivity and performance, and how they've been like, it's only going to be for this short time, or we've put some things into place in order to make sure people are connecting, that we're checking in on people. People are kind of noticing that we need to be, because things are changing so quickly, and yet at the same time a lot of people tend to be in a holding pattern. We need to be consistently reevaluating the approaches that we're taking and making sure that we're still focused on the right things, that we are, still marching in the right direction. Like what are the goals, and are they still the right goals? And then, how are we setting those expectations and measuring performance? So hearing the same things as you are. And I think, this trend of what's next for us to focus on will continue to evolve as our global pandemic plays out, and how we handle it as a society.
It's making me think, like I worked in an organization where, not unlike a lot of organizations that have some structure, is that, everything is so cyclical, at least as it relates to performance. There's ongoing regular performance conversations. There might be an annual performance review date. There's goal setting. There's potentially, compensation practices that line up to the achievement of certain goals and metrics. And that's all, I don't want to say thrown out the window, because that's not the right answer, but it's a big, messy pit of things right now, because the goals have changed, the tenor with which those conversations are happening, the frequency, what's discussed in those conversations has shifted. And so I think the kind of more usual or assumptive structures around managing performance and goal setting, all that are, if they're not in disarray, they will be. And I don't mean that as a bad, like, messiness. I just think it's the adaptations our organizations need to make based on not just where the business is, but also where the individuals are.
Mm-hmm.
One of my consulting clients has been spending some time the last couple of months really evaluating capacity, not from a super scientific way, but really, what is somebody's available capacity and what work can be done within that capacity? So, for example, they, have a large part of their workforce that is homeschooling kids right now. And some of those people can only work basically the equivalent of 20 hours a week because they're busy homeschooling the young kids. So they're looking at the individual's capacity of what can be done within those 20 hours a week. And that's okay, right? Given that. So not that they have to actually find another 20 hours somewhere else, whereas somebody else might have capacity at 40 hours a week, and what should get done and what are the goals within that. And it is creating a little bit of feeling of, I'm going to say imbalance a little bit, but also the organization and the people within it have some empathy for one another, that everybody's doing the highest quality work and the highest quantity work within the capacity they have available. And I think that's just prompted an interesting conversation, because it's not that everybody has the actual same capacity right now. So that is
Right.
one example of people that are working to adapt this given the current circumstances.
I think you touch on a really good point, and we've touched on it briefly in previous conversations, but that's this idea of equity versus equality. And I've shared a story. It still rings true today, about a woman that we have who's always been, in the years that she's been at Aduro, has always been one of our top performers, with the best attitude, with the greatest work ethic, and doesn't ask for extra accommodations. And she's also got two little kids, and those two little kids are now at home with her. And she definitely, because they're really young, she has a greater she has to take on more of the responsibility than her husband does. And she has a really tough time actually asking for help, because she doesn't want that to reflect poorly on her career, or shut down opportunities that she may have in the future. So I think that it's a key thing as leaders, that we need to remember what kind of fears people have in asking for help when they need them. And when I use this particular woman as an example, because she's always stepped up and helped everybody else when they've asked, now everyone's willing to jump in and help her at this time, because there's a balancing act that happens over time, and this is just one moment in time. And we do have to make some accommodations for for those people who are taking on a lot of extra responsibility around them. And I think that this is all done in good faith, that it will balance out. And I think it's a great call out too, that you have some people that have more capacity and are asking for more right now. And so it's not a peanut butter approach of just like spreading it across everyone, that this is what we're going to do. It really does need to be personalized. You have to know your team members and care enough about them personally for them to trust that sharing this information with you about what they're going through will be taken into account in a way that is supportive of what they need during this time, and where you're building good faith for the future as well.
Yeah, for sure. You really got me thinking about, like, if I, on a given team, I had 10 people and I have, a few that can only commit to X number of deliverables in a given, week, period, month, because they have the other responsibilities. And if somebody else who can, deliver 10X that, or maybe it's just twice that because they have more capacity, it really becomes then, as a leader, of focusing and measuring on the quality of that work and how that work gets done. And by that, I mean looking through your organizational values, principles, the things that guide you. Because even though you may have one person that's delivering more than, because the other person maybe can't based on their availability, you still, to one way to be somewhat fair or kind of, look at it consistently is, the quality of which the work's being done, and also how the work's being done within the organizational's, values and principles, which I just said that. So I think that that's really something to think about, and to be, I know a lot of organizations in this, particularly in times of crisis, can appropriately reward heroics, but not everybody can be a hero right now. And so it's, again, taking a balanced approach, that even if somebody can take on twice the amount of work, it doesn't you don't underestimate the quality and the work that the person who, isn't able to deliver that much of, but it's still really, really high and important. So yeah, keeping that balance and knowing, to your point, the individual is really important.
Absolutely. When you think about that, as leaders, we have to step back and look at the entire landscape, right? And make sure that as an individual leader leading a team, that the goals that you're setting are realistic and appropriate for the time that we're in, that they are aligned to the overall company goals, the mission, the values, that we're all kind of rowing in that same direction. There's those standard things that we need to do as leaders. When you think about setting expectations during this time, what's important to consider in how we look at setting those performance expectations, and how we then follow up and follow through from the leadership perspective?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a few key points to that. One we've already talked about is really setting expectations really includes understanding an individual circumstances. So that's one thing. Two is really being able to explain why these are the expectations. How do they ladder up to the overall mission? Why are these priorities important? Why the decision's been made to shift priorities, if that's the case, and how you as a leader have decided to balance the workload on the team given these individual circumstances. So knowing the individual, really clearly communicating, not making assumptions that everybody knows, what those expectations are and why those expectations have been set is important. And to keep that conversation ongoing, because things are going to continue to change. I do think at some point, and this kind of goes beyond your question of expectations, Tony, but at some point, an organization who is on whatever the cycle you're on in terms of rewarding performance is going to be able to get to work on that too. So if you're going to be doing pay raises this year, what does that look like? If you're bonus or in a bonusable roles or organization, how are you going to be doing that given this? So there needs to be some upfront planning a leader needs to do, in addition to really clearly setting those expectations today based on the individual, and then actually explaining what those expectations are and why they are the way they are. So, but time to start looking around the corners because at some point Like I know some companies, their fiscal year ends in the summer or will end in the fall. And a lot of times pay related decisions are hooked into that. And if they're not thinking about it, they need to be thinking about it now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also the point on expectation setting of making sure that you're on the same page. I think this is always important, but it's a really good time to also just check back in and say like these, and setting those expectations together with people, checking in to see what if we have a goal of X, what is your confidence level and being able to achieve that? And I don't expect anybody to always feel 100% confident. If so, I think we're sandbagging our goals a little bit. So it's not that we have to kind of back all of those off, but just being in lockstep with every individual around, how they feel about the goals that are set. A constant communication around their progress towards those goals, and open communication when things aren't going quite the way that they want to, so that it gives the leader has this opportunity to coach people through that situation and shift the support and the expectations as they need to through this time. I think it's actually giving a lot of leaders an opportunity to dig a little deeper into their coaching skill set. And it's also showing us internally some of the skill sets that some of our newer leaders are missing that we kind of need to beef up. We were about to launch some leadership development literally the week that everybody went remote. We kind of backed off of that, and we've been watching the conversations that are happening, a lot of the performance conversations that were happening with leaders, where we kind of have to step back and look at like some of the basics around having career conversations, and what it means to have goal setting conversations with people, to have that mutual buy-in to both of it, to tie it back to the vision and the values of the company like you were talking about, and then let people know what the impact of reaching those goals will be, and kind of how that relates to everything that you're talking about. The pay and the bonuses and what's possible this year and why it is or isn't possible based on the status of the company. So there's so much that's wrapped in there. There's so much complexity, and we're seeing all of it. But I think it gives a great opportunity for leaders to also check in with themselves, right? So I think at any time, if we look at the performance and the productivity of our teams, and we're seeing that everything across the board is kind of dropping off, we have to look at ourselves first as leaders. In primal leadership, Daniel Goleman talks about how the leader brings the energy, the weather, the mood that shapes what's possible. And we have to keep doing that, and we have to actually take a step up and do it even more during this time. What are your thoughts on just that tone and tenor that the leader sets for their teams?
Well, it's obviously has significant impact of when, if you've got one potential performance concern on your team and your role as leaders to coach it, that's one thing. But if it starts dropping everywhere, that's not a blame the team situation. That's the saying, you point one finger at you and then all the rest are pointing at somebody and all the rest of the fingers are pointing back at you. So yeah. That's one of those situations where, you definitely need to pause and check yourself. And as you mentioned at the beginning of this webcast, Tony, last week's session on, putting your own oxygen mask on first and how you are leading yourself during this time in your own mental health. I would start there. Like, how am I feeling? I would ask myself, how am I feeling about the current circumstances? How am I feeling about my own performance? What are the things that are challenging me? How effective is my communication with the team? What seems to be landing? So I would ask myself a lot of those questions. And I would probably, depending on the nature of my relationship with the team, which I'm assuming had been good up to now, I'd be asking for feedback on how are the things that I'm doing landing well, and what is challenging right now, and open up a dialogue. But that is definitely a sign to look at yourself and one, how you're feeling personally and emotionally, given all the constraints as well as the challenges of the current environment. And then two, how is that potentially impacting the team? And going out and asking them for input. And it might be a little challenging because there's already a lot on your plate in terms of the emotional experience you're having, but it's really important because right now, this is the time where we need everybody to feel well cared for, feeling like they're doing meaningful work and have a purpose orientation, and to lean in on that more than we ever have and figure out what's going on. So I'd go back to the webinar from last week, and then I would reach out to the team and get some feedback.
Yeah, I'm with you. I completely agree. I mentioned it at the beginning. If you missed last week's live cast, I think it was really great to, before you're even looking at the mental health and emotional well-being of your team, that you're checking in on yourself. And just, I think that in times of stress, we we tend to fall back a little bit on our self-awareness and how we're showing up. There's one of my favorite stories on leadership. Christine, if you read the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, it's not a book that I would have read because it's about, Navy SEALs, but a young man on my team recommended it. He wanted to do a presentation to the company around this idea of extreme ownership. And so I read the book to kind of get a sense of it. This is two Navy SEAL trainers and very famous guys now that have written books and done a lot of cool stuff. But anyway, they tell a story about these two boat captains during SEAL training. And there's this one, I think it was boat crew 2 was just destined to win every single competition, every race, every competition they were winning. And then boat crew 4 was losing every single race. And they were watching how the team members were interacting. And, they were like, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to pluck these leaders out. We're going to pop them in the opposite boats and we're going to see what happens. And, like what they saw was now boat crew 4 that had the leader from boat crew 2 started winning every single race, and boat crew 2 was still doing pretty good, but they were never winning that race. And so, I think that while this is one story about leading a boat crew and it's in high times of stress, we can learn some really great lessons from that, in that, like your leadership in times of stress can change the way that the team shows up as well. And it all starts with that self-awareness of yourself. I love what you talked about, that, if you have built great relationships with your team, then opening up a dialogue and asking for feedback. What am I doing that's working? What am I doing that's not working? And, how can I be supporting you better? And having those real conversations that are steeped in humility and self-awareness are key. I think that's super powerful.
I would just add, and, you had mentioned previously around, managers who are potentially newer in role or less experienced managers. And if you're a manager of managers, it is a good time to reach out and see what additional support, training, or coaching your managers might need. And your story about your organization postponing that leadership or that management training, I've heard that in other organizations as well, which makes total sense. And I think people are starting to realize there are some things they need to pull forward to support those managers to be able to have conversations with their teams and to be really clear on, again, back to our point around the expectations, why the expectations, and how to evaluate performance, because it's in a new environment. So while organizations may not have the capacity to take on big training, I would advise that leaders go out and look and say, okay, do any of the managers on my team need some additional support and coaching? And how can I help them lead their teams through this, especially as it relates to conversations on productivity, work quality, and performance, so that we can set them up for success, because they just may not have the experience or the nuancing that might come from a more seasoned leader. So I just wanted to kind of tie that back to especially newer managers.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, we did put it on hold, but I think the key that we've recognized is that the things that we want to pull forward, which to your point, we are pulling forward. There's two things that we're pulling forward. One is grounded in what you and Amy talked about last week, which is training around mental health. And training, we're working right now on a training for our managers around decreasing the stigma of mental health support and the need for that, and also just how to support people in their own mental and emotional well-being. It can get scary for leaders, and we're seeing that is really foundational to being able to work well with your team. Is just like getting a sense of how they're doing, knowing what to do when they're not doing well, and and always checking in with yourself and seeing how you're setting that context. So mental and emotional uh, well-being training for our leaders is something that we're pulling forward, as well as how to have those career conversations that include just everyday performance conversations, and teaching our leaders to coach, just some really basic coaching skills to pull out what's holding people back, what's getting in their way. How do we reframe mindsets and shift those into what people can control, and prioritizing. And so those are the things that we're really pulling forward. So we're a small organization. These aren't things that we have really deeply ingrained at this point, like a lot of larger organizations do. But this experience of going through a global pandemic is painting a clear picture of what are the main things that we need to be teaching our new people leaders all the time, that are going to show up in greater times of stress. So it's not a time to put all of training and development on hold. I think that it's a perfect time to actually be reading the organization and seeing what people need and putting those things into place. Absolutely. Here we are at the end already. Again, what are your big key takeaways from today, Christine, that you want to leave people with? What golden nuggets?
Well, I would start with the one you brought up, which is, as a leader, just checking yourself first, both your emotional and your mental well-being, and then how does that connect with the team's performance. Then I would take a look. Number two would be looking at individual circumstances. And we've talked about this on past weeks, but really understanding where the individual's at, but then calibrating the performance expectations with them. So that's number two. Number three is being really clear with the entire organization on how you're managing productivity and performance expectations and why. And then the last one, which is one we just talked about, is see if anybody else on your team needs some additional training or coaching and support during this time, especially as a manager, so that they can serve their team and move forward. So those are the four.
I think those are beautiful, and you wrapped it up really, really nicely. I appreciate you and all of those of you who have just been, focused receivers of this conversation that Christine and I had today. We will be having some more conversations about mental health and a leader's role in supporting the mental health of your people moving forward, as well as any of the hot topics that are coming up in the future. So please continue to join us in the weeks to come. And if you find it valuable, invite other leaders to join us. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you next week. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, Christine.
Bye, Tony.